This demo is actually bowl turning 101, but I'm going to start out turning a spindle. Seems a little bit different, but I'm hoping this works out, and I'm hoping that by turning a spindle, you'll be able to equate it to a bowl. Because a bowl, a side grain bowl like most of us normally do, is nothing more than a spindle turned on its side. The outside of a bowl is a bead, and the inside of a bowl is a cove. And the way that you cut beads on a spindle and the way you cut coves on a spindle is the same way that you turn when you turn the outside of a bowl. It's turning a bead, and the inside of a bowl is turning a spindle. So I've got a blank on the lathe here. It's just some poplar that I had kind of laying around. And we're going to turn a bead and a cove. So how do we turn a bead? So here's my spindle, right? And I'm between centers here. And there's grain in the wood. And this is really what defines a spindle, is the grain runs parallel to the bed of the lathe. And you can turn bowls that way. But I think anyone who's turned an end grain bowl knows that hollowing it out can be really, really tough. Hollowing end grain is really, really difficult to do. It's a lot of work. So we normally turn bowls this way, side grain, between centers there. So if I was going to turn a bead on this cove, I'm going to start at the top of the bead, and all of my cuts go downhill from there. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to cut down that side. So that wood goes away. And I'm going to start at the top and come down that side. So that wood goes away. So all of my cuts are going to start here and go this direction, and start here and go this direction. I physically can't get, especially when I'm just getting started, I can't get my gouge in here to cut uphill on the bead. You just can't do it. The wood's in the way, the spindle's in the way, the headstock's in the way, everything's in the way. I can't get my gouge down into there to cut uphill. And we call it uphill because it actually has grain direction, and you're sledding. It's winter, you're sledding, it's going downhill. All that trudging the sled back up the hill, that's not the fun part. The fun part is starting at the top and going downhill. So that's what we're going to do on a bead. A bead is the outside of the bowl. So we're going to start here, and we're going to make that cut. Starting here, making the cut that direction. Because of the direction of rotation, it's actually easier. I don't have to turn the other side to match. I think that's one of the hardest parts of spindle turning, is turning the other side of the bead to match the first half. Little tip for that, we generally turn better to one side or the other. Turn your weak side first, and then turn your better side, because your better side can better match your weak side, then your weak side can match your better side. So just a little tip. But again, because of the direction of rotation, it automatically mirrors itself. If I'm turning the cove, I'm going to start here, and all of my cuts will be going down towards the center. And again, I'm not going to climb back up that hill. So every cut goes wider and deeper. But again, always cutting downhill. That grain, we're cutting downhill. The bowl, when we go to do the inside, it's the exact same thing. All of my cuts are going to be starting up here and going down towards the center. So again, a bowl is nothing but a bead and a cove rotated 90 degrees. Any questions on that? Okay, let's make some sawdust. Talk about safety very, very quickly. I always talk about safety everywhere I go and demo. I've removed my wedding ring. I'm on my 4th one, I think. I stopped getting gold ones about 10 years ago. I now get tungsten carbide ones off of Amazon for about $12. So it doesn't matter if I lose it, I'll just buy another one. I've removed my watch. I actually forgot to put it on this morning. It's still on the charger on my nightstand. I don't have any hair really anymore to speak of. No long sleeves. Even my microphone cord is run on the inside of my smock and around the back. So I have no loose jewelry. If you happen to have long hair, it should be tied back. Always be aware this thing is spinning. It's really easy to get something caught in there. And there have been bad things have definitely happened. I will be wearing a face shield at all times. And here we go. So I'm going to turn very quickly a bead and a cove on this and kind of explain again and demonstrate the cuts. I'm going to do a bead on this side. I'm going to do a cove on this side. So we'll turn this up. So to do a bead, I'm going to start at the top. My flute is going to be open. And as I cut in, I'm going to lift and rotate the gouge at the same time. I'm going to have to get rid of a little bit of the waste here. And we'll do the same thing on this side too. I'm going to start with the flute open. So the flute is at 12 o'clock. That's what we call open. This would be closed. This is also closed. So if we talk about opening the flute, you would turn it more towards 12 o'clock, so straight up. If we talk about closing the flute, we're talking about rotating it away from 12 o'clock. The flute should always be pointed in the direction of the cut. So if I'm cutting to the left, the flute will be pointing to the left. If I'm cutting to the right, the flute will be pointing to the right. So again, all of my cuts are going to start at the largest diameter and cut down to the smallest diameter. Largest diameter, cutting downhill to the smallest diameter. And like I said, I physically really can't get my gouge in there and get a bevel rubbing cut and come back up that hill. You just can't do it. And if you do it, you're much more likely to get a cut. You're much more likely to tear the grain. All right. So there's our bead. That's the outside of the bowl. It's that one cut. I'm going from the foot up to the rim. If we cut this in half, and if it were more spherical, you'd be able to see that we actually have a bowl shape there. So we'll do a cove on this side. A cove is done kind of a similar but opposite. So I'm going to start in the center. I'm going to start with the flute closed, and as I cut down in, I'm going to rotate the flute so that it's open. Every cut I'm going wider, and every cut I'm also going deeper. So I'll start every cut up here on the edge, flute more or less closed. If I don't have the flute closed, or if I don't have enough support behind the tool, you'll start to make the cut and it will skate. So I like to start with the flute nice and closed, a lot of support behind the tool with my left hand. A little aggressive. And once I reach the bottom, I'm not going to come back up the other side. Every cut is just downhill. Now I use the spindle gouge for these cuts, but there's no reason that we couldn't use the bowl gouge. Handle sometimes gets in the way a little bit. All right. We can definitely go back and clean that up a little bit better. But the point I wanted to make is this is the outside of a bowl. All the cuts go from what is the foot down to the rim, from the narrowest part to the widest part. And on the inside, it's the opposite of that. Every cut goes from the rim down to the foot. All right? So let's pass this around. Tony? All right, so I brought a piece of wood with me from my neighbor's tree. Don't tell them. This happens to be pear. Anyone ever turned pear? Oh, it's so nice, isn't it? And this is like very, very green. So this should be a lot of fun. So I've got my center marked on here. And I just kind of roughed this round on the bandsaw. We're not perfectly round. That's all right. I'm just going to eyeball this. They're relatively flat up there. That's fine. I'm just starting between centers. So the wood as it's oriented right now is how the tree grew. This was the bark on the outside, so I've basically taken this log, split it in half. I've faced off this side on the bandsaw and I cut the piece round. Now, one of the first things I see people doing wrong, my opinion, this is all my opinion, completely self-taught, I've never taken a class. The first thing they're gonna do, we're gonna draw another picture here. They're gonna set their lathe up just like this. They're gonna set their tool rest up right here. And the initial thought is, I'm turning a round bowl. I must turn this piece of wood round. That's step number one. And that's not an efficient way to do it. So let's draw a picture up here real quick. All right, and we'll go back again. So I've gone to Rockler or Woodcraft or wherever, and I bought this piece of wood. And it's a really nice piece of wood, whatever it happens to be, and I paid $28 for it. I want to make the biggest bowl possible out of this piece of wood. So what am I going to do? I'm going to turn a bowl that looks like this, right? That's what my first bowl looked like. Anybody else? Couple? A few? It's actually a really, really tough shape to make. Particularly this 90-degree corner down in the bottom, flat across the bottom. There may be a little recess down in here that you use to chuck it. Maybe not. Maybe it still has screw holes in the bottom. My first bowl certainly did. So that's not a very pleasing shape to make. And again, you pay $28 for that piece of wood. I want to make the biggest bowl possible. I want to get every bit of that. I want to use as much of that as possible. Same bowl blank on my lathe between centers. What if I made a bowl more like that? Still this wide, still this deep, and then we hollow it out. Nice curve in there. Very pleasing curve, much easier to make because it's just one curve. I don't have to make that 90-degree corner down at the bottom. Still 9 inches wide, still 4 inches deep or whatever. It won't hold quite as many M&Ms, but it's a much better shape. It's pleasing to the eye, it's pleasing to the hand, and it's actually easier to make as well. The other side benefit to this is, we talked about setting your tool rest up right here, and your first step is to turn this to a cylinder. How much of this blank is a cylinder at its maximum diameter? Almost nothing, right? That much. So the rest of this, we spent that time and effort turning this to a cylinder. All that stuff ends up on the floor anyway. So what I would like to see happen is don't set your tool rest up there, set your tool rest up here. And immediately start to get rid of that corner. That's where the material needs to come away from. We're making a bowl, we need to remove everything that's not a bowl. That's where the majority of that blank needs to go away in order to get the bowl shape that we're trying to do. It also has a side benefit. I can make that practice cut. I may make 6 or 7 cuts to get this piece round. By the time we get up to here, it's round. And I will have practiced that cut, and muscle memory is actually it's a very real thing, very important. I will have made that cut 6 or 7 times, so by the time I get to that finished cut, the hero cut, where you make that one cut from foot all the way up to rim, I just did it half a dozen times. My body's used to that motion. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to set it up and turn this to a true cylinder because we don't need to.
Mason,
Yes?
address one more thing.
Sure.
That beautiful piece of wood, and you've looked at the end, and you've got this grain that is spectacular, but you want it to be oriented so that when you finish your bowl, the grain
don't really worry about that too much. I really don't. I'll try to, if I'm doing a natural edge, I'll try to make the wings, balanced, the top, or I will try to make them very unbalanced. I don't want them a little bit unbalanced because it looks like a mistake. I want it to look intentional that they're off balance. But that's also one of the reasons I start pretty much everything between centers. I can't tell you the last time I used a faceplate. I moved to Illinois over 3 years ago. I don't think I've used a faceplate in those 3 years.
Jason, can you make a bowl bigger than that piece of wood?
Can I?
Yeah. Ask Calvin now.
Al?
Cut it up into little pieces.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a square piece, rather than cutting it round on the bandsaw and then turning it round, you can make square bowls or winged bowls, where if you measure corner to corner, that 8-inch square blank on the diagonal is probably over 10 inches. So yeah, but you'd have to dry it. We're going to talk about drying a little bit, but we're going to talk about drying roughed out bed, not drying lumber.
Just a conversation.
All right. So speed all the way down, especially on a piece that's maybe a little bit out of balance. If I was in the shop last night turning pens, like Tony was, and I was turning pens at 3,200 RPM, and I come out and I put a piece of wood maybe bigger than this that's off balance, and I turn my lathe on at 3,200 RPM, something bad is going to happen. So rule of thumb, lathe speed all the way down, turn the lathe on, then slowly turn the speed up. You can always speed up your lathe. If it's going too fast, you may not be able to get it slowed down or stopped before something bad happens, particularly with a design like this where I have to reach across the spinning piece to get to my off button. Some lathes, I have a secondary off button on this side, so I don't have to worry about that, but something to definitely keep under advisement. This is a pretty small piece of wood, so we can crank this up pretty good. That's about 1,000 RPM. Old guys we used just a minute ago. Man, right-handed, are you getting one?
No, my insurance card's in my pocket, just in case you guys need to know.
Yeah, we do have a safety shield, however, it does not have the plexiglass in it yet. So we're still working on that little bit of this. So bowl gouge, my rule of thumb for using a bowl gouge is 45, 45, 45. So I'm going to start with the gouge 45 degrees to the ground. I'm not going to be 90 degrees here or 90 degrees here. I'm going to be 45 degrees here. I'm going to have the flute rotated about 45 degrees in the direction of the cut. I'm going to be cutting from the foot up to the rim like we cut the bead earlier. So my flute is going to be pointed in that direction. And then I'm going to approach the wood at 45 degrees. I'm not coming in 90 degrees this way or 90 degrees this way. I'm coming in at about 45 degrees. So 45, 45, 45 is a rule of thumb. I'm going to start with the handle low and then raise it until it just starts to cut. And then start to feed that steel through. Still pretty rough initially. There's a little bit of bark on here. Very, very quickly, we're approaching that bowl shape already. I'm going to adjust and move in my tool rest. I don't want my tool to be any more than about 1 inch over the tool rest anytime that I can help it. So when you're first starting and roughing out a piece like this and just knocking out the corners, you're going to move the tool rest fairly frequently. So each cut makes the bowl slightly smaller, both in depth, because I'm taking a little bit off this end, and a little bit smaller in diameter. And there, there's that bead shape that we talked about earlier. Bark's completely gone. You have a tiny little bit of pith right up there. No pith on that side. I do have to admit, this pear is fantastic to turn. It's soaking wet. It makes you look like a hero. I absolutely love it. Jacaranda, I used to get in Phoenix quite a bit. Super, super plain and boring, but boy, it makes you look like an absolute superhero.
Smells
when
pretty
you're
good up
demoing.
here
I
too.
was gonna say it smells good.
All right, so I'm going to put a little bit of a tenon on the bottom of this, and we'll talk about tenon shape a little bit. There's my roughed in tenon. I'm going to clean that up just a little bit more. Bevel ribbon cut. All the way from the foot up to the rim. Now, what I'm not going to do is, on the bead we talked about earlier, I'm not going to cut this direction. I'm sledding down the hill. I'm not trudging back up the hill to carry the sled back up to the top. So let's talk about tenon shape real quickly. So we're going to draw some more pictures. If you haven't noticed yet, I love to draw pictures. All right, so tenon shape. Tenon shape and size is going to vary a little bit based on your chuck, the different manufacturers, the different sizes, of course. But the general rule of thumb, I use dovetail chucks. So my tenon is going to have a slight dovetail to it. This is exaggerated slightly, quite a bit actually. I want the jaws of the chuck, different color for that. I want a nice flat shoulder here. Nice flat shoulder here. And I want the jaws to match that profile. I want the jaws to be deeper. That's a terrible pen or marker. Let's try the blue. A little bit better. So I want the jaws to match that profile. I want the jaws to be deeper than the tenon. I want a nice, sharp, clean corner in here and a nice, flat shoulder here. All of the strength comes from this shape, not necessarily from the compression. I don't want the tenon to bottom out. What I mean by that is if I draw another tenon here, so nice flat shoulder, tenon there with the dovetail, and my jaws, like that. I don't want that gap there. I want to make sure that my jaws rest on this shoulder before the tenon hits the bottom of the jaws. I don't want the tenon to hit the bottom of the jaws before the top of the jaws hit that shoulder. Okay? I don't want any roundness to that corner in there. I don't want this shoulder to be maybe angled up that way. I want a nice flat shoulder, a nice clean corner, and the depth of the tenon needs to be less than the depth of the jaws. You don't need a lot of tenon. You really don't. This is a 1/4 inch, and I probably don't even need that much. I probably could have got away with about 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to clean up the tenon. I'm going to put a little bit more of a dovetail on there. I'm going to use my spindle gouge to do that. So there's, I'm going to put just a little bit more of a dovetail on there. Nice sharp corner down in there, nice flat shoulder. So now we're ready to take this off. Now a couple of points. I always leave the mark from my live center on the bottom of my blank. It really helps later on after the bowl is dry to get it centered up. I do most of my bowls. Almost all of my bowls are done twice turned. So I turn the wood when it's green. I turn it to 10% of the diameter. So this is about 7 inches. I would leave it about 3/4 of an inch thick. Consistent 3/4 inch thickness. They go in paper bags in my basement, and I forget about them for a year. Then I take them back out, and they don't have to be done immediately. I've got bowls I've rough turned 10 years ago. that are currently sitting in my garage waiting to be finished. So we're going to rough turn this out. We're going to go again about 10% of the diameter. So this is about 7 inches. So I'm going to go about 3/4 of an inch thick. If it was a 10-inch hole, I'd leave it 1 inch thick. If it were a 15-inch hole, I'd leave it 1.5 inches thick. So that's a general rule of thumb. And that way, when you get done, like this one was roughed out a little over a year ago, probably a little bit thicker than it could have otherwise been. This has gone slightly oval, and you'll see when we put it back on the lathe to actually finish it a little bit later, but it's gone slightly oval. But I have enough thickness here that I have plenty of material that I can turn it backward. I'm going to drew out the outside, then we'll turn the inside, turn it down to finished thickness. And then if we have time, we'll even try to get the bottom off. So I'm going to use a chuck to do this. Tenon size, I think, is somewhat important. If I was turning a 15-inch bowl, I wouldn't use a tenon that's 2.5 inches in diameter. I'd probably want something 4 or 5 inches in diameter. If I'm turning a 6-inch bowl, a 4-inch diameter tenon is probably overkill. So, a lot of guys change jaws. I change chucks. So we'll put that in there. My pressure to keep it even in there. If I've done this the right way, dead on. Absolutely true. Doesn't always work out that way.
Fair.
Let's see if we can get a little more light. You guys see that better, hopefully? All right. So I'm going to pull the tool rest back a little bit. I'm going to bring the tailstock up just to be on the safe side. Especially because this surface is a little bit uneven. It's fairly flat. But my first operation is going to be to flatten that off. Now I've got the part where we're going to start to turn the code. All right. Done as much as I can do with the tailstock in place. So we got one little spot there. We'll take care of that. We'll move the tool rest over. I want to be slightly below center with the tool rest. My tool is going to be angled up slightly, and that puts me right back on center height. And now we're going to start to make that cove. So every cut, that's that shading that we talked about. Every cut is going from the rim down to the inside and right to that center point, but not past it. If I go past that center point, I really can't cut because the wood's going up on that direction of center. And if you did try to get it, it's probably going to lift the tool off, and it's generally bad news. Every cut from the center or from the rim down to the center. So like we were doing with the cove, every cut makes the cove wider and deeper. Sometimes you don't want to go all the way to the bottom, that's fine. Go part way. And now I can come back where I've already established that cut. Take it deeper. Check my thickness. A little bit thicker as we go down towards the bottom, so I'll take a little bit more off. Still got that little spot on the top, on the rim, we got to clean up. Okay, that takes care of the rim. A little bit too much. little further over the tool rest than I'd like. So I'm going to adjust the tool rest and actually have it go inside the bowl. It just reduces that overhang a little bit more. Gives me a little more tool control, a little less vibration too. All right, one more cut. Famous last words, right? You guys know Woodturners' famous last words. One more cut. You know why? Yeah. Well, it's like your car keys are always in the last place you look, right? You know why? You found them. Stop looking. You don't have to look anymore. But one way or the other, one last cut. So a lot of support behind the tool so I don't get that skating. Yeah. So as I make you may notice I'm also rotating, I'm swinging the handle on the tool and I'm rotating. So as I enter the cut, the flute is basically closed and my handle is all the way over here. As I progress through that cut, I'm swinging the handle towards me. I'm also slowly rotating the gouge so that the flute ends up basically completely open at 12 o'clock when I hit that center point. So it's a fairly complicated motion. We'll do one more time here. Start the handle all the way over there, flute basically closed. And as I continue into the bowl, I'm swinging the handle all the way over to my body, and I'm rotating the tool so that when I end up on that center point, the flute is basically straight up and down, completely open. And we're a little bit thinner than I wanted to go. We've my shoulder down in there is a little bit fat, a little bit of a spiral in there. But that's a rough turning. Oh, any questions on that? We're doing on time. We're way ahead of time, I think.
What size gouge are you using? 5/8?
Well, yes and no. So it depends. It depends on who makes the gouge. So there are different measurements. The Americans and the Europeans measure things differently. And it's not just inches versus centimeters. For my personal preference, these are Crown Pro PM gouges. This is a 1/2-inch bowl gouge. But if you wanted to go to an American manufacturer like Thompson or probably Carter & Sons, D-Way, maybe even the Woodcraft, what's their Pinnacle brand, I think. They'd probably call this a 5/8. But the brand I use, the brand I buy, they call it a 1/2. So it depends.
Is that because they measure the pool by the flute?
I've heard that the Europeans measure like the width of the flute, where Americans measure the diameter of the bar. I've never verified that, but I definitely have heard that. Yeah, I don't know. I use what I use. I love my Crown tools. That's what I have always bought. That's what I've always used. I've got some of the others. I've got some Thompsons. I've got some Carter & Sons, but I love my Crown Pro PMs. Okay, so we've taken that bowl and we've set it aside, and it's dried for 6 months or a year or whatever. Dick, how long?
Until it's dry.
Until it's dry. Okay. So I noticed there's a Ray Key bowl over here. Any idea how long that's been dry?
I haven't any idea.
Not a clue? Okay.
The way I feel is it's been dry quite a while.
Yeah, I definitely have bowls that I've roughed out 10 years ago that I still have setting on a shelf in my garage.
I brought some in here some time back at 89.
Yeah. When if you were in Chicago and we had some of the bowls show up here, the Tim Putnam bowls, you know, a lot of those were dated, I think 80s and 90s when they were originally roughed out. So I've let this bowl dry, let's say, for a year, and it's gone slightly oval. So I'm gonna clean that up. And you know, there's nothing wrong with once turning green bowls, letting them warp. Bob, I think you do that a fair amount. So he's got some over there. Yeah.
I've turned mine like you've done yours and let it sit, and within a day or two it splits.
You gotta.
Yeah, I can't. And it seems like, you know, no matter what I do, I have an issue with drying the wood out. I don't know if anybody else has had that problem, but.
So I'll tell you what my process is. My process, I rough turn the bowls. They go in brown paper bags, either from the grocery store, or if they're really big bowls, they go in the big yard leaf bags. And those go in my basement on a set of shelves where there's minimal air movement. The kids aren't running around. It kind of creates a microclimate and slows down the drying process.
But you cut the grounds first and then put them in the bag and not.
Yeah, I would turn it just like I did tonight, and that would go in a paper bag and go in my basement for a year.
Do you put the shavings with it? Or just
I don't do anything. And you know, some people will coat the end grain with wax or like anchor seal. It's like anything else. Ask 10 different wood turners the same question, and you'll get 20 different answers. Some people green turn to finish, and that's all they ever do. Some people rough turn to finish, rough turn and then refinish, and that's all they ever do. I'm mostly one of those people. People will microwave. Production turners, a lot of them will have kilns. Glenn Lucas and
They did they have 150, 200 for about an hour. I took it out, it was fine. The next day it was fine. And then went to turn it, did what you did, and it was fine until the next day after that. Then it come down there and it's split in half.
it also depends on the wood. Some woods dry easier than others. This pear, I have no idea. It's the first time I've had pear. But I think fruit woods are notorious for moving and cracking. So, fingers crossed, we'll see.
Also, what's the orientation of the line and how you getting fit up?
Yeah, consistent wall thickness is important because you want it to dry evenly. If you're too thin or too thick, if you're thin at the rim and thick in the bottom, the rim is going to dry out before the rest of it does. And then as the bottom dries out, it's probably going to split that rim open. So there's a lot of factors. This is what I do. This is what works for me. And that's what I'm demoing tonight. So,
Last week?
No. The logs were probably rough cut a couple months ago. That's been sitting on my driveway since then. I cut the blank on Saturday night. Yeah, it's soaking wet.
Have you noticed any difference in your line between when you lived in Arizona and here?
I have, and maybe ironically, I think I'm losing more bowls to cracking here than I lost in Arizona. I don't know why, I'm trying to figure it out, but I've definitely had bigger bowls just split wide open on the side, and a lot more of them than I've ever had when I lived in Arizona.
Yeah, we put a fire in the furnace.
Yeah.
What's the average humidity in your house?
I have no idea. But they're in the basement. So
Do you know what the relative humidity in Arizona in the wood is, or the amount of moisture
it's generally drier.
in wet wood?
Yeah, it's generally drier.
We have quite a bit of water.
Okay, so we put this bowl on here, and you can see that it has moved a little bit. Not a ton, but it's definitely out of round. The rim up here is also not flat. It's peaked closer to the pit. So you can see we're slightly out of round. The rim of the bowl is also not flat. And even my tenon down here is out of round. So I'm going to true up the outside. I'm also going to true up the tenon. I'm not going to do a sanding or finishing tonight, but we can definitely talk about that a little bit. So there's no reason to change the cuts. All of the cuts will go from the rim, I'm sorry, from the foot up to the rim, just like we were turning the bead when we were talking about that earlier. A little bit off there. I think the whole thing shifted on me. We're not tight here. And I just jammed this against my chuck. That's what I do. I'm going to true up the inside anyway, so any little marks on there are going to get turned away in just a few minutes. If you wanted to put them against a foam jam chuck, or like the foam on your vacuum chuck, or jam it against a piece of wood, that works too. I already have the chuck on there. It's easy to just jam it against the chuck, true it up, and then it's ready to go into the same chuck and actually get it finished. So trying to get that nice pleasing shape. Clean that up a little bit with a more shear scraping tool. We'll have another chance to come back and address the foot of the bowl in a little bit. True up that tenon, flatten that shoulder. Make sure that shoulder's nice and flat. I'm going to put a little bit more of a dovetail on this. Hopefully, my tenon diameter is right, because I only brought the one chuck with the one set of jaws tonight. All right, we're in good shape. And again, if I've done my job right, it's pretty true. I'm pretty happy with that. There's maybe just a tiny bit of wiggle in that, but honestly, the wood, even if the wood is dry, the wood's probably going to move more than that over time. So now we're going to address the rim. I've got to flatten it off and do whatever I'm going to do to the rim. My recommendation, don't leave the rim flat. Do something with the rim. Tilt it out, tilt it in, give it some sort of shape. I don't recommend completely rounding the rim over, but I also don't recommend leaving it just completely flat. So this is pretty rough up here, because you saw earlier that there was quite a piece on this. Let's see how we did. I think we're not quite flat. It doesn't feel like it. Still got a little spot out there. So I'm choosing to angle the rim in a little bit. And give it a little bit of a curved profile. I just think that looks and feels very nice. And a little bit of tear out there. I'm not going to, quite a bit more on that side. I'm not going to worry too much about it. If I wanted to, I could come back with the shear scrape. So get rid of that, see how we did. A little better. That's much better. And now we'll just true up the inside of this. So like I did earlier, I've got the Torres angled to the inside of the bowl. Reduce that overhang. one of my personal aesthetics and one of the things I like bowls to either be finished bowls, to be consistent wall thickness all the way down, whatever the thickness is, consistent, or I like the rims to be thick and then to kind of undercut and go thinner on the bowl as you go down. I think the opposite of that is what I don't like. I don't want to pick up a bowl that's maybe, you know, 1/8 of an inch thick at the rim that you can see it's just 1/8 of an inch thick, and it's 1.5 inches thick in the bottom. Because instinctively, your brain just knows that bowl, that size, that thickness, I know what that should weigh. And you go to pick it up and it's, oh man, that's really, really heavy. Whereas this, it's going to be the opposite of that. Your brain sees this thickness and says, oh, it's 3/4 of an inch thick. That should weigh quite a bit. And you go to pick it up and, oh, that's pleasantly light. I'd rather something be pleasantly light or the right weight than be, holy crap, that's way too heavy for what it appears to be. So I'm slightly undercutting that. I'm about maybe 7/8 of an inch thick at the rim. I'm down maybe probably a fat 3/8 as we go down. Probably take it a little bit thinner. As I go down, I'm leaving the mass on the inside because that's going to kind of help the bowl hold shape. If I tried to do this all in one cut, especially if you're going really thin, like maybe 1/8 of an inch all the way down, the rim is going to move way too much by the time you get down to get the rest of the material out. So we're undercutting slightly. Bevel rubbing cuts, we're just turning coves pretty much. And now we can remove some of this mass in here. A little bit rough to start because the bowl is oval and uneven. So I'm turning a little over 1,000 RPM. I could probably go. Check my thickness, see how we're doing it on my depth in the bottom. I will say I never measure anything. These are my digital calipers, finely calibrated. And I'm honestly not bragging, maybe bragging a little bit. I rarely make funnels. And you know, part of that, I almost always use a tenon. I hardly ever use a recess. I have some special forms that I make, my Tauruses. I do recesses on those. And sometimes on really big platters, I'll do a recess on those. Pretty much everything else is a tenon. And when I'm done, that tenon gets turned into a foot, or the tenon gets turned away completely. A round bottom, or maybe just a hint of a flat spot. I never want to pick up a piece and turn it over and see where somebody's gone in with a Forstner bit and then just expanded their jaws into it, and that's their finished bottom. I want to spend as much time on the bottom as I've spent on the inside, because I think I'm like most of you. First thing I do when I go over to the gallery is I pick up a piece and I turn it over and look at the bottom. Or a hollow form, I stick my finger inside. That's how you know somebody's a wood turner, is when they pick up a hollow form and the first thing they do is stick the finger inside to feel, you know, how good is the cut on the inside, how thin is it. And we're going to... Yes, yep. Yeah, make the small hole enough nobody can get their finger in there. And that way it's sanded to 600 on the inside too. Yep. All right, so we'll finish this and then we'll throw it on the vacuum chuck. I think we're going to have some more time to do that. All right. I'm happy with that. It's got a nice shape. It's one consistent curve once you get past that slight undercut in there. very easy to cut. It's just one smooth curve. Feels good, looks good. Looks to be pretty well cut. So we'll take this out of the chuck, turn the bottom, and we'll call it a night. So show of hands, who has a vacuum chuck? Love it, right? Change your life? Yeah. Maybe not change your life. That may be a little bit of an exaggeration.
One point for the folks that
Sure.
have reliable last time. They talked about even 10%. Remember, do the same thing on the spigot on the bottom. We always talk about having our jaws as tight as you can get them. But if you don't have a wide variety of trucks and jaws, you turn your spigot real close to that 50mm jaw, and you're closed down on it. When you come back and you clean that spigot up, it'll no longer fit in your jaw. So you need to leave that spigot a little bigger. So you need to leave your 50mm jaw a little bit bigger when you're roughing it out, so you can clean it up and reclamp it in your jaws.
Yeah, that's one point that I think I maybe disagree a little bit with, some of the other experts. I don't worry as much about getting the chuck to be, an 1/8 of an inch closed from the complete circle. I really don't worry about that.
Go all the way down either. When you see that lever, you really close down and if you rough it out that way, it's not going to fit your 50mm vacuum.
All right, so we're on the vacuum chuck. The chuck isn't turned on yet, so we'll go ahead and do that. It's going to be a little bit noisy. Okay, so that says I'm getting about 10 inches of mercury. That translates to roughly 5 pounds per square inch. Doesn't sound like very much, but that's 5 pounds per square inch. This is a 4-inch PVC coupling. If you do the math, that's 12 square inches at 5 pounds per square inch. So I've got about 60 pounds of pressure holding this piece on. I can actually put my hand on there. You may be able to hear the vacuum change. We're pulling air through the end grain. But we should have plenty of pressure on there. I'm going to take this away for just a second. Now I have full access to the bottom of this bowl. Now I wouldn't do that. We're going to put this back. My recommendation, always turn with the tailstock in place until you absolutely can't have it in place. So we'll do a little bit more of the shaping on this to get rid of the tenon. There's still about 10 inches of mercury. And then we'll get to a point where I'm going to have to take it away, and we'll do that. So because I have left my point on here from before, and I'm back on here, and this, this is man-made material, it's not going anywhere. This is basically perfectly centered. I mean, you can maybe see just a tiny little bit of wiggle there, but it's not enough that anybody is ever going to notice once the piece is actually done. So I'm going to get rid of the tenon, or most of the tenon here anyway. And again, as much as I can, all of these cuts are going uphill. We may get to a point where some of them can't, or we may do more of a shear straight. So what I'm doing there is I've basically got the bow gouge laid on its side. The piece is closed, pointing towards the piece, and I'm just dragging that bottom wing along the surface. The top wing never actually touches. But if I open up that slit too much, and I'm not careful about it, then you can definitely get a fracture. Okay, we've got that pretty much there. I'll turn down this nut, get that screwed up a little bit. I could go in here with my spindle gouge. Get that down to an absolute nub if I needed to. But I've got a vacuum chuck, so that's what we're going to use. So now I just need to get rid of this nub, and I'm going to undercut the foot a little bit, turn it into a nice little foot there. So all of my cuts now I'm not gonna have any cuts pushing this direction. All of my cuts are gonna be going this direction. So I'm pushing onto the vacuum chuck rather than across the vacuum chuck. There's not enough pressure on this that I can get away with that. But there should be enough that we're okay if my cuts all go this direction. Turn the lathe down a little bit. It's about 700 RPM. At this speed, if it came off the chuck, it would probably just fall on the floor. It's not going to go airborne. It really doesn't weigh all that much at this point. It's relatively thin. I'm not sure exactly how thin in the bottom, but it's thin enough. So all of my cuts, very light cuts, are pushing towards the headstock. Very light cuts, again, I'm just relying on the vacuum pressure. There's nothing else holding this piece on here. If I had a little more pressure from the vacuum chuck, I could be a little more aggressive, but I don't want this piece to go flying off. Alright, now I'm going to switch over. I'm going to do a push cut from the center out, and that's going to undercut that foot. I always leave the foot slightly concave. If I made the foot perfectly flat, wood is going to move. Sometimes it's going to move up, and that's okay. Sometimes it's going to move out, and you're going to have a point, and that bowl is going to rock. So to counteract that, I always make the foot a little bit slightly concave. That way if it does move outwards a little bit in the center, that point is still below the rim itself. Also gives me a nice little place to sign my name. Touch that corner right there. Make sure that's flat and we're lower than we are in the center, and it is. So we will hold on to that. Turn off the vacuum. There she is. All right, any questions? So we'll leave this up here if you want to come up and take a look at it. I'm pretty thick in the bottom, thicker than I thought I was going to be. Question?
Comment first. 3 questions. You nailed this tonight, but I have the opportunity to be teaching 2 young boys the basics, and your didactic here is really going to be helpful for me. I applaud you for making it clear and concise, and it's really helpful. I always struggle with, particularly for myself and these other young boys, is safety, 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 safety. I don't know the way to beat that into someone. Like a pilot will do pre-flight checks again and again and again. Same way, before you look at the damn thing, safety first. And you taught me something tonight about plastic. Never knew about that. So my first question is, you mentioned converting that sheet mask to what type of protective plastic?
I don't think
The face mask? The face mask?
I don't think I spoke directly about that. This is a Uvex. It's on Amazon. Maybe.
Talking about the shield.
Oh, the plexi. No, the safety shield. Not this.
Okay, maybe listen to it. So is that, I misinterpreted that what I was saying. So there's no better plastic shielding material to be more protective than what you get over the counter?
There are some that are definitely better than others, and there's ANSI ratings, and I don't know what all of those are.
I thought I heard plexiglass.
Well, we were talking about the actual safety shield that would go in front of the lathe.
Gotcha.
And plexiglass is really not all that strong. Ideally, it would be something like Lexan.
You can buy a riot helmet, like the police wear.
And I've
Pretty
seen,
tough.
the most common face shields are just the flat piece of plastic and they don't have any support down around the bottom. If something big and heavy comes off the lathe, it's just going to bend that plastic. This at least has this rigid, more rigid frame around it. This is going to give you a lot more protection. This is around, I want to say $30 or $40 on Amazon. They're not terribly expensive. And it's a safety thing. It can help you in accidents, but honestly, it keeps the shavings out of your face and your eyes anyway. So it's worth it just for that.
Two questions relate to anyone in the audience who can help out here. As we teach young guys how to always remember to tighten or double check any mnemonic or anything you do to make sure they start at low speed, you cover that nicely, tightening that banjo and the tailstock. Any mnemonics or techniques to let them know critical, critical, critical.
I don't have one, but it's definitely a good thought. A mnemonic. So I didn't talk about it too much, but a lot of people talk about ABCs: anchor, bevel, cut. So when you're cutting, anchor the tool to your body, nice wide stance. B, the bevel, rub the bevel on the wood. So we talked about that a little bit, where we start low and then raise the handle so we're on the bevel. And then C is cut. So you want the flute in the direction of the cut, and also cutting downhill.
Again, beautifully done. Robert, how will I be able to get my mitts on this thing? Either YouTube or DVD, or how am I going to get to access?
He wants a copy of the demo.
Yeah.
This will be on YouTube, I think.
YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, we can put this
What's
on.
the ask for? What's the title? YouTube.
Windy City Woodturners.
Okay, thank you.
Do you remember them?
That was good.
You can Google it or search it on YouTube.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You didn't have a vacuum truck. How did you do that?
It's a good question. There are lots of ways to do it, and there are lots of ways. There's cold jaws, which I think are pretty common. They would have rubber bumpers on them, so it'd be like my big jaws, but they'd have big flat jaws on them with rubber bumpers that you would close down, and it'd actually grip the bowl from the outside. Longworth jaws are similar to that. There are two kind of counter-rotating plates. That's what moves those bumpers in and out. And then they'll have like wing nuts to actually lock it in place. Jam chucks. Take another scrap piece of wood or another bowl and turn it so that the bowl fits on it or over it. And then maybe a couple of pieces of painter's tape. I do that all the time for bowls. There's lots and lots of ways you can do it.
I used to do enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Do it on a jam chuck.
I can get my, the concave foot that's done. I leave a little nub on there. I take it off, get carving gouge, sit down, carve that off, sand it, and you're done. So you don't need
So jam it against something else, another bowl, something like this, very easy to make. This is just PVC and some craft foam from Walmart. Turn it down to a little nub, something that you can easily sand away or carve away. You could very easily get down to a nub, a quarter inch or smaller.
Will the vacuum chuck hold it strong enough so you can sand it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's play with this for just a second here. And I'm only pulling about 10 inches of mercury. This pump should be capable of pulling about 25 inches of mercury. It's on. Like, it's seriously on. And I'm getting a fair amount of leakage through this. It could be easily double that. I mean, you're more than welcome to come up and try to pull it off of here. The other thing you could do, something happened to the inside, and you want to, sand and refinish the inside. Obviously, that's not centered, but you can very easily do that on a vacuum chuck as well. So yeah, finishing, refinishing, sanding, applying finishes, light finishing cuts, does all of that. Anything else? All right, thank you guys. So I want to apologize to whoever